Dear the Indie Stone, hi, it's me, Austin! Project Zomboid is a hardcore zombie survival game, probably the most realistic zombie survival game ever made, and it is quite literally one of my favorite games ever. I remember how I discovered it too. I saw a random guy, hi Eliodon, streaming it on a Discord server I was in, and he had based up in the Rosewood fire station with a friend of his, and we somehow convinced him to explore the prison down the road. He had some fun killing zombies with his car outside, but as he crept inside, he was easily overwhelmed near the cells, fell from the top floor while over-encumbered, broke his leg, and got eaten alive. I was instantly in love. My patrons are probably sick of me talking about this game by now, as the past several weekly live streams have all been Project Zomboid, and I recently made a server for them to join, which has gone well.
Oh, someone's dead.
I've been wanting to do a video on Project Zomboid for years, but I could never really find a good angle to cover, but I finally arrived at the secret solution to all of my content creation problems. Cabbages. But more on that later. First, let me give you a rundown on what Project Zomboid is for those of you who may not know yet. Project Zomboid is a zombie survival simulator that looks like it was made in the year 2000, graphically speaking. But that's partially because while this is what it looks like at the start, these are the sorts of things that can end up happening in-game. You can't have next-generation graphics while rendering 2,000 zombies on screen. It takes place in 1993, probably because they wanted a world before cell phones and where hot wiring cars was easier, and it occurs in what is called Knox Country, which is basically the southwest metropolitan area of the Kentucky city, Louisville. Also, shout out to a friend of mine that went to school in Tennessee who got on me for saying Louisville and course corrected me that it is in fact Louisville. I thought about taking issue with how it's pronounced, but then I remembered I used to spend a lot of time in St. Louis and they'd probably kill me if I pronounced it Saint Louis, so yeah. Point taken. I definitely don't want to be that one person I knew who pronounced Des Plaines as Des Plaines. Anyway, I'm getting distracted. The initial outbreak happens in the suburbs of West Point and Riverside, but quickly spreads, and within 2 weeks, what is known as the Knox event breaks containment out of the exclusion zone and makes it into Louisville. And later, symptoms of the Knox infection start appearing all over the world. So I'm gonna be real with you, zombie apocalypse outbreaks are generally unrealistic, not just because of the shambling corpses, but because in most media, the zombie infection usually has to spread exclusively by biting from infected people. This likely would be a horrible way to spread a zombie infection, as we'd very quickly just start doming zombies in the head, and that'd be the end of the outbreak. Clever, modern stories usually have to come up with a way to somehow bypass this issue by making the zombie infection more prolific somehow. In The Last of Us, the initial outbreak spread through food, but can also spread through aerial spores. In The Walking Dead, technically everyone is infected, and it's just that zombie bites are fatal, but anybody who dies becomes a zombie. In Project Zomboid, they went a particularly clever way with it, I think, and that's that they decided to make the zombie infection airborne like the flu, but some people are immune to the airborne strain, which leads us, finally, to you playing the game. You are not immune to bites, but you are immune to the airborne version of the virus that kills you. Which brings us finally back to Cabbages. Sweet, wonderful Cabbages. Project Zomboid is a punishingly difficult game, especially for new players, but having over 500 hours in the game myself, I'm something of an expert. So I'm gonna use Project Zomboid to teach you how to survive in the zombie apocalypse. And the true secret to surviving the zombie apocalypse is the almighty cabbage. And let me tell you, the stuff I have unearthed about the secret world of cabbages makes the horrors of the zombie apocalypse pale in comparison. You see, cabbages are one of the keys to surviving long-term in Project Zomboid. They only take 10 days to grow and 12 days to bear seeds, have 170 178 calories each and can grow unimpeded in wintertime. They are a survivalist dream. This, of course, will probably change when Build 42 comes out, which will probably be while I'm making this video or the next one with my luck, but for now, it's the miracle crop, and in many ways, it is in real life too. But in order to make this video proper, I decided that I was going to set out to survive as long as I could, hopefully up to a year in Project Zomboid, in order to prove that I had the chops to pull this off as an expert. While there were no YouTubers in 1993, I decided to model my character more or less after myself as a content creator to see if I, as someone you may know is very interested in prepping and apocalypse survival, actually has what it takes to survive the zombie apocalypse. I was highly inspired by this video by Mr. Atomic Duck to play this game more realistically by actually doing things I might do in real life during a zombie apocalypse if I were ignorant of the genre, like actually staying sheltered in place to quarantine against the outbreak for the first few days watching the news. So how did that go for me? Well, here is where I was going to tell you this big long story about Melba George, the burger flipper YouTuber who resembled my real life skills and traits, but this video is on track for being my longest science video ever, and I actually ended up having to break it up into a two-parter. Originally, I was like, no, I'll just make it one long video, but when my script got to over 10,000 words, which my video length summarizer said was going to be over 67 freaking minutes, I decided that there was no way that I could make this one video. I also didn't want to spend precious minutes explaining what happened to a character who inevitably... So, suffice to say, attempt number 1 did not do very well. Lasted 3 days. Good job, Melba. You sucked. But you know what doesn't suck? ExpressVPN. That's gotta be my worst segue ever, oh my god. But honestly, I love ExpressVPN, no joke. I think everybody knows that your internet service provider scrapes your online activity. It'd be actually kind of weird if they didn't do that. In fact, in the UK and Australia, ISPs are legally required to log your activity. But did you know that in the United States, it's legal for ISPs to sell your activity to ad companies? It's just like, there's no law against that. It's horrifying. Using a VPN can encrypt and mask your online activity so that ISPs can't do stuff like that, which is actually pretty important to me personally because I do not want people knowing where I live or trying to sell me copious amounts of cabbage seeds because I spent days reading about cabbage farms for this video. If you are more of a casual user of the internet though and don't have crippling cabbage related fears, you can still take advantage of ExpressVPN because you can use ExpressVPN to bypass region locks on streaming services. By changing my location via the VPN, I can trick a streaming service into thinking I'm, I don't know, in Canada or something, and I can watch a certain comedy show that is my staple ADHD comfort show that I ordinarily wouldn't be able to in the United States. You can get 3 months of ExpressVPN by heading on over to expressvpn.com/shoddycast or clicking the link in the description. Now, let's find out how we're gonna survive this zombie apocalypse using cabbages. I decided after Melba bit the dust that I was going to try again in the same world. Meet Sue Nielsen. She's still a burger flipper and is also a smoker, which I 100% would start smoking again in the zombie apocalypse, is nearsighted, and is a slow reader, which I actually am in real life, but is also a fast learner and is crucially lucky. Here we go, baby. This is the start I need. Let's roll those dice one more time. We're spawning in Rosewood and we're several days into the apocalypse now, so no more wasting time. We immediately find a leather jacket, jackpot, and an umbrella, which will be our first weapon, which sounds terrible, but the umbrella has the spear moveset, which means it can get one-shot kills if you're lucky. After looting some essentials, we immediately leave our starter home and start looting neighboring homes. We have to find stuff to drink and eat and dispatch our first zombie with the umbrella. We are looking for a few key things for our survival. 1, a backpack so we can store tons of stuff we'll need for the road. 2, a shovel for digging furrows. 3, cabbage seeds so we can survive long term. 4, food to last us while our cabbages grow. 5, a real weapon because there's no way we're not dealing with zombies in this playthrough, and 6 cigarettes because Sue is a smoker and going without would make her severely depressed. Cabbage seeds are crucial in our playthrough of Project Zomboid because they are how we're going to survive. I went over the details of why they're so good in Zomboid earlier, but let's compare the Zomboid cabbage to real cabbages to get a sense for what it would take to survive on cabbages alone, because that is our plan. We are going to be cabbage farmers, and that is it. Once we get the farm rolling, we're gonna be just relying on cabbage and the occasional thing we forage to survive. Here's a cabbage in Project Zomboid. 178 calories, 41 carbs, 9 protein, and 0.71 fat. I'm assuming that's grams? So how does that compare to a real cabbage? Well, kind of unfavorably, if I'm being honest. I'm taking the average head of cabbage here for all my math, and we're gonna do everything in grams to make my math easier later, including things like vitamin A, which are usually measured in micrograms. Just deal with it. It makes life simpler for me. The average head of cabbage weighs 981 grams, has 245 calories, 56.9 grams of carbs, 12.57 grams of protein, 0.982 grams of fat, 24.5 grams of fiber, 0 grams of vitamin D, 0.359 grams of vitamin C, 0 grams of vitamin B12, 0.00004905 grams of vitamin A, 0.001765 grams of zinc, and 0.3925 grams of calcium. This may seem like more information than we need, but trust me, it becomes super duper important later. The base adult needs about 2,000 calories to survive per day, but that is just the baseline, like you sitting around doing nothing. How you live your life makes a huge impact on how many calories you need to maintain your weight. This is true in real life, and it is also true in Project Zomboid, which has a calorie system in it. Now, we know if we survive long enough, we're going to be a cabbage farmer. According to Colorado State University's Agricultural Sciences Department, a human doing moderate but sustainable gardening exertion needs 220 more calories per hour of labor performed. Estimating that managing a cabbage garden would take about 6 hours of labor per day, this puts us at a calorie requirement of 3,320 calories. This amounts to us having to eat 13.55 cabbages per day, and any time we are estimating cabbages, we are going to round up, because you cannot grow half a cabbage, at least as far as I know. So that is 14 cabbages per day you have to grow somehow, and that is our goal if we want to survive in real life on cabbages. But first, we have to survive the zombie apocalypse, which means we need all of those items on our list. We are on a time crunch too, because on days 6 to 9 from the start of the save file, a helicopter shows up. Not to rescue you, sadly, but just to stare at you while you run from every zombie it drags in around you from the loud noise. And remember, we've already burned over 3 days on our first character. The items on our list are the essentials, but anything more we get will be a bonus. Ideally, a car would also be great so I can drive off instead of walking to our destination. Our destination? This cabin right here just outside of Muldra. This location is perfect for long-term survival, and it's exactly where I'd go in the apocalypse. It's far away from urban centers, secluded in nature, and crucially, it has a well full of fresh water, as well as a wood-burning stove to cook food in and survive the cold winter months. This is a survivalist dream location, and we immediately got wounded right before killing our 5th and final zombie with the umbrella. Thankfully, just a scratch, not a bite. Leather jacket probably saved us. Any wound from a zombie can infect you though, with scratches having a 7% chance of infection, lacerations having a 25% chance, and bites having a 100% chance. So we really cannot afford to get wounded at all if we want to live. I spent the rest of the night scrounging around in the house thinking of my next move, and the next day set out through a forest and into nearby fields, killing zombies along the way and looking for anything that might help me as I left town, hoping to be in the wilderness by the time the helicopter event happened. Along the way, I got combat boots, some matches, but crucially, in the first farmhouse I stumbled into, I found a freaking crowbar and a backpack. Now it's time to rock! fuck? A real weapon? Scratch that off the list. Backpack? Boom. Done. And on a zombie, I found a hand fork. Not quite a shovel, but it can dig furrows, so that'll do. Then, later, I found some broccoli seeds on a farmer zombie. Not exactly what I'm looking for, but I think it will work if I can't find cabbages. Plus, it lets us know that if we kill farmers, there's a chance that we can find seeds. So we're gonna kill every farmer zombie we find. The rest of the day was mostly a waste, and now we're solidly in potential helicopter event territory, so I need to get out of town as quickly as possible, but I still don't have what I need, mainly cigarettes and cabbage seeds, and I'm a little low on food. I found some more seeds on farmers, including cabbages, freaking jackpot, also a cowboy hat, ye freaking ha. Now, in theory, if I have to, I can just leave for the woods and probably survive, though I need to make some more preparations if I can. Specifically, I would like cigarettes because Sue was already getting sad from not having them. Next day rolled around and I was kinda getting nervous because the helicopter event was imminent. I set out, and while reading a magazine to reduce my sadness and fast-forwarding time, I got jumped from behind, and astonishingly, nothing bad happened. I survived unharmed. I would not be getting that lucky again. Attacks from behind are supposed to be almost a death sentence in Zomboid. Woo! Gotta be more careful. I continued to loot and kill zombies for the rest of the day and slept in a military barracks, still without cigarettes and with a mediocre amount of food. No helicopter by 9:30, so I misjudged in my favor, thankfully, but I was running low on time. I checked out the drive-in movie theater because I knew cars had cigarettes, but some zombie bumped into a car alarm and set it off, which meant the place was gonna be swarming soon. I hopped the fence and dodged the incoming waves of zombies and decided to take a risky sleep inside a police truck. I woke up with zombies banging on my windshield, but I was alive and well rested. I was gonna check the gas station for cigarettes, but a massive horde caught me, so I booked it out of town again. 4 days so far with no cigarettes. In 1993 somehow, nobody had cigarettes. This has never happened to me before. This is supposed to be free trait points. I headed back to the farmhouse, did my last looting of the area looking for anything I missed, grabbed some food, and slept. At 6 in the morning on Sue's 5th day and 8 days into the Knox event, I left the farmhouses forever and started heading toward my safe haven. I could live without cigarettes, but I could not live without food. I needed to start on my new life. Dodging zombies on the main road, I headed east, hoping to run into this large strip of dirt, which I could then follow north to my target destination on foot. I found it and started my journey toward the cabin, and just in time, too. At 2 p.m., I heard the whirring overhead of the dreaded helicopter event I've been worried about this whole time.
Helicopter, helicopter.
And I was in the perfect spot, far away from a ton of zombies and still far from the cabin, just in case it stirred any up there. This literally could not have gone more perfectly. I prepared for a zombie invasion, but none came, so I soldiered on. I decided to rest for the night in Ben's cabin off to the side here. I did find a hiking bag, a huge upgrade from the school backpack I'd been using. I slept and then continued my journey the next day, content knowing that when I passed the next road, the helicopter event wouldn't trigger and ruin my life. Finally, I arrived and the cabin was already occupied, nothing that my crowbar couldn't handle, and from here, we were basically set for life. I set to making myself at home. I made sure there were no zombies around, did some foraging, and went to sleep. But finally, it was time to start planting crops. I had found 2 cabbage seed packets, a radish seed packet, 2 strawberry seed packets, and 5 tomato seed packets on the various farmers I'd domed in, and I was ready to start self-sustaining. Okay, so we've arrived at our safe haven, and we know we have to somehow farm enough to get ourselves 14 cabbages per day in order to meet our calorie requirements. What would that actually require? Well, it's not as bad as you'd think. Before I researched this, I was convinced that a farm large enough to sustain a single person on cabbages alone would have to be astronomically huge, but it turns out that's not necessarily true. 1 cabbage can grow in about 1 square foot of dirt, so how many square feet of dirt do we need in order to get our cabbages? Well, realistically speaking, and I did look this up, and this is what gardeners recommend, you want to space out when you plant them in increments so that they mature at different times, so you can harvest them when they're fresh. In non-winter months, cabbages take about 60 days to mature. That's not too bad. That means we need to plant 14 cabbage seeds every day, 1 foot apart from one another, every day for 60 days. And then we could harvest the first 14, eat them, and plant more, moving on to the next row the next day. Easy. So 14 times 60, that's 840 square feet or 78 square meters. So that's what we need for our large garden, right? Well, no. See, 60 days is how long they take to mature in non-winter months. Cabbage actually is a hardy vegetable that can grow in winter in many climates. Cabbage can grow in winter in USDA hardiness zones higher than 5, and the Louisville area is a 7A climate zone. Oh. Wait, no. Apparently, it used to be 6B. Global warming, baby! Anyway, 6B is good enough to grow cabbages in wintertime, but even though cabbages can grow, they do take longer to grow in winter because the cold weather lowers their metabolism, plus there's less sunlight available to help them metabolize the energy that they need to grow. They take around 100 days to mature in winter, so realistically, you want to be prepared early for this developmental requirement and have the ground already prepared, which really means you need a garden that's more like 1,400 square feet or 130 square meters. So that's it, right? Well, no. Not yet. You want to leave some space for you to walk between the cabbages so you don't step on them while you're trying to water and tend to them, so accounting for a 4-foot space between them, that adds about 6,550 more square feet, which is a lot and makes our walkway space actually about 82% of our farm, but you have to be able to actually tend your farm without trampling your crops. This brings us to a grand total of 8,050 square feet or 747 square meters for our subsistence cabbage garden. That's about the size of this in Project Zomboid if you ignore this little part up here. What's that part? I'll tell you when you're older. Literally, I'm gonna tell you later. For now, let's just keep this in mind. This is our garden size we need to sustain ourselves and produce over 5,000 cabbages per year. Jesus. I planted my broccoli and the cabbages because I hadn't really totally committed to only making cabbages yet at this stage. I started watering them and realized I might actually go frickin' crazy if I had to just water my plants with a single water bottle and a mug. It took me 15 real-life minutes to water the first crops. I knew that there was a series of warehouses to the south on the outskirts of Muldra that I could possibly raid for supplies that would make my life easier out here in the wilderness. So I decided to make my way there, crowbar in tow. And on the way there, I finally found some cigarettes on a zombie after 8 days. Jeez! I made my way into the warehouses, and I'll spare you the total breakdown, but after mostly clearing the area, I looted over 50 cigarettes, a shovel, twine, more broccoli, carrot, and tomato seeds, 3 lighters, a box of matches, 2 hand axes, a bucket, a pipe wrench, and 3 bottles of wood glue. I also dumped a bunch of zombie clothes on the floor because I realized in wintertime I might need warm clothing, and I didn't want these to decay with the zombies. But I also didn't feel like carrying them back just now. The hand axes would be a big quality of life improvement when it came to clearing the trees, but the big get that I wanted most was that bucket, which was going to make watering my fledgling crops way faster since it could carry a ton more water than a water bottle. Happy with my haul, I left to head back to the cabin, and I stayed there for several days watering my crops and organizing my new belongings. After tending my crops, I headed to the pond in the east to try fishing to keep weight on my bones and to keep myself from starving while my crops grew. I had already decided that I was going to ration my cigarettes and only use them when I was planning on going on violent excursions. Depression from the tedium of everyday life is a drag to live with, but in mechanical terms, it has no real impact if I'm not planning on doing any combat. And out here, life was peaceful. I'd need to save my precious cigarettes for when I really needed them, especially since my tools to start fires with were limited, and I would need them for winter to run the stove. You can start a stove by rubbing sticks together, but it's very unreliable and wears you out big time. So no, Sue would just have to suffer permanent nicotine withdrawals and potentially keep the lung cancer at bay. I had also amassed a lot of bugs to eat if things got too dire, since I wasn't able to grab a lot of canned goods on my way out of Rosewood's outskirts. Let's look at our plan a little bit more in real-life terms before we continue on. We need 14 cabbages per day. How are we going to plant those all? Seeds, of course. In Project Zomboid, this part is easy. The second to last stage of growth, you can harvest your crop, but if you wait a bit longer, it will mature into the seed-bearing stage where you can harvest seeds off of your plant and replant them, getting essentially infinite food. You can do this with most real plants in the real world too. Tomatoes have seeds, all sorts of fruits have seeds in them. It's wonderful. Cabbages aren't a fruit, however. They are a collection of leaves from a plant, but they do bear seeds. There's a problem, however. Cabbages do mature past the harvestable stage and produce seeds. This is true, but they are what's called biennial, which means they do not produce seeds until their second year. This means you have to wait an entire year for a cabbage plant to begin producing seeds in real life. This is a big problem for us because we need to grow 5,114 cabbages in order to stay alive, minimum. That means that the 2 packets of seeds, which gets you only 100 seeds, is not going to be enough to keep you alive enough to see cabbages become self-sufficient. You need more like 500 seed packets or more like a seed bucket in order to keep yourself going with cabbages. This is bad news for Sue if she were trying to do this in real life. That's what this little nook over here is, by the way. This is the space you would need to reserve for cabbages to produce enough seeds to keep this garden and you alive, since cabbages produce about 500 seeds per cabbage. Best to play it safe and overplant though, since your seed yields can be unviable, so you definitely want more than you need just in case. Overplanting for safety, That makes me think about... You know what? No. Well, we will talk about that later. For now, let's think about our immediate survival. On the 26th, I decided to venture north using my knowledge of the game to my advantage. There were some homes to the north that I decided to raid for food to tide me over until my crops came in. Not much of note happened other than I got more seeds and farming volume 1, which would level up my farming skill faster, and a bunch of canned food. I ended up walking all the way up to the nice houses by the pond outside of West Point, and one of them was even boarded up, which usually means there's good supplies in there. This is a great alternative to the cabin with the well if you yourself are looking for long-term survival, by the way. There's a small cabin nearby with an antique stove to the west, and there's a pond right here, and it's right near the river. You can live here essentially forever. Honestly, it's almost like a nicer version of my cabin, but the water here is tainted and will kill you, while my cabin has a well of pure, clean water. Anyway, I looted these homes and got another hand axe, a wood axe, more cigarettes, a new leather jacket, a baseball bat, some medical supplies, a bunch of canned food, and crucially for later, several bottles of wine. I even found a sledgehammer, though I left it behind because I actually had no use for it. Maybe I'll remember it for later, though. I carried it all back in a duffel bag I found. The whole trip took several days, but luckily the rain took care of my crops for me, and when I came back, my cabbages weren't only ready for harvest, they were at their seed-bearing stage, which meant if I harvested them, they would give me seeds which I could plant to get even more crops. I was finally about to be self-sufficient. I replanted them, and the real mundanity could begin. I extended my farmland, cut down trees, I watered, I tended. This was my life now, a life of repetition and the agrarian tradition. I feasted on a bountiful array of cabbages until I was gaining weight again. My plan was to hit the highest weight I could so I could be fat for winter when food got leaner and harder to come by, so I could survive on a calorie deficit. I planted cabbages every 2 days so I'd be able to harvest fresh ones as soon as my last batch went stale, basically just like we planned for our real-life cabbage farm. So Sue has become self-sufficient in spite of it being impossible in real life, but there are actually greater concerns to keep in mind. I mentioned overplanting for safety a bit before, and that got me thinking about, well, my own experiences gardening. My spouse and I have a small garden on our patio of our apartment where we grew some summer squash, herbs, and my favorite, tomatoes. And you know what happened to almost every single one of those plants? Diseases, pests. Our tomatoes got something called end blossom rot, which can happen if your water levels aren't quite right. I didn't get a picture of the really bad ones, but here's one of the last ones that got the rot before we fixed the water issue. The squash got powdery mildew and just dodged a bullet from squash bugs when my spouse found a bunch of freshly hatched nymphs hiding under a leaf on one of our flowers, and some motherfucking bug was eating my sorrel, and I could never fucking find it, and I wanted to kill it so much. Anyway, point is, plants get diseases and pests. It's inevitable, especially if you're not a commercial farmer with nuclear options at your disposal. Growing cabbages in the forest, you're at the mercy of all sorts of pests like rabbits, but more pernicious would be cabbage webworms. Halula rogatalis is all over the United States and can decimate not just cabbages, but any crucifer like broccoli, cauliflower, turnips. These bastards love killing crucifers. And don't think you're safe in Europe or Asia either, because you guys get Halula undalis, which basically is the same pest but looks slightly different. According to the Food and Agricultural Organization of the United Nations, between 20 to 40% of crop yields are lost to pests and diseases, which means if you're only growing enough cabbages to eat and survive and nothing more, you are going to starve to death when some fucking rabbit or evil cabbage worm comes to eat your crops. You have to grow more. I decided to go aggressive and say you should grow 30% more than what you actually need, which is on the high end, which really means you need to be growing enough to harvest 19 cabbages per day, which is almost 7,000 cabbages per year. That's 6,940 seeds you need. This increases the size of our garden from this to this. With our seed cabbages, that's 10,465 square feet, or over 972 square meters. Thankfully, the seed cabbages don't take up too much extra space, but this is much bigger than what we were doing before. And guess what? That's not even the worst of it. But not yet. I'm getting ahead of myself. Right now, Sue has other problems. Sue was not yet prepared for the long haul. We needed more tools and supplies, and I hadn't yet checked every warehouse to the south, so I headed there early in the morning to start looking for more things that would make survival easier. I got a saw, boxes of nails, more cigarettes, even more seeds, some batteries for my radio if I needed them, and holy crap, looking back at the footage, I just saw that I passed up a freaking watering can. I am a moron! Those things can hold so much water. I am adult. I needed vital carpentry experience in order to fortify my farm against intrusion, which, by the way, much later on, and in our next episode you'll see, ended up coming in so freaking clutch, you wouldn't believe it. I didn't even believe it either.
In the book business, this is known as foreshadowing.
I spent a day or two disassembling all the crates in the warehouse in order to raise my carpentry to level 2, and then decided to head back with my spoils. I then built composters for my rotting cabbages, tended my farm, and started the long process of walling in my farm. Sue grew depressed from the lack of cigarettes, but she was thriving. But if I was going to be composting my cabbages as they rotted, I needed more tools. On the way north before, I passed a series of warehouses that had nothing but rotten food in them. Useless, right? Wrong. Because I didn't want the food that was in them. I wanted the sacks that were holding the food. If I dumped the rotting food out, I could use the sacks to fill with fertilizer. I gathered 50 sacks and headed home, ready to continue on. Now, composting doesn't do much in Project Zomboid. Fertilizer lets you take time off the growth period, but otherwise doesn't do too much for you. Meanwhile, in real life, fertilizer is going to save your bacon. So right now, this is our minimum garden size, accounting for pests, right? 10,000-ish square feet. But things are not as simple as they seem, because what happens when you get to the end of your first growth cycle? You harvest your first line of 19 cabbages, throw away the shitty ones, eat the good ones, and replant them. Can you count on that next round of cabbages being as good as the last ones? No, you can't. But why? Because plants, all plants, take nutrients out of the soil when they grow. They literally suck minerals and other things out of the dirt, primarily nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, but tons of other micronutrients as well. And once they're gone, they are gone until something puts them back. So your next generation of cabbages would be stunted and less nutritious unless you do something about it. Thankfully, there is something you can do about it. Composting. Composting is a controlled rotting process where you, well, rot vegetation and other things until they break down into their base nutrients again, which you can then use like a fertilizer. This, thankfully, is actually not the worst thing you have to worry about here. Composting takes about 6 to 8 weeks to complete, sometimes more, sometimes less, but you have a little bit of time, thankfully, and we chose a forest, which has like a bazillion compostable things. Leaves are freaking everywhere, and most of them are probably partially composted already. Gather up every plant you can, get it into a pile, and turn it over every few days, and in no time, and by no time I mean a few months, you'll have fertilizer. However, this does take time, and you really want to give your fertilizer time to settle before you plant on it. So really, what you want is not just one field, but 2 fields. You have your first field where you grow your first generation, and your second field where you grow your second generation. Then, while the second generation is growing, you can fertilize the first field with your composting that should be done by now. You can do this essentially forever with whatever resources you have in the wilds. This essentially doubles our field requirements to 20,930 square feet or 1,944 square meters, but this, I promise, is the last time I'm going to increase the size of our farm. These numbers sound quite big, but really, this is only about 36% the size of a football field, or just 24% the size of a soccer pitch for you non-Americans. This whole composting process is not impossible like the seed harvesting you'd need to do with your cabbages would be, and when wintertime comes and you're burning wood in the stove, you can save that ash and you can use it to re-enrich the soil as well. This is definitely possible, but it's something really important to plan for early because of how much time it takes, otherwise you'll end up dying from malnutrition. Dying from malnutrition, huh? Interesting that I would bring that up and so close to the end of the video, because it turns out on an all-cabbage diet, or really any diet that is composed of literally just one thing, has some drawbacks. Horrific ones. Things that are so horrifying they will keep you up at night thinking about them. I will spare you the details for now. That will have to wait for our next science episode, where we will experience the stunning and thrill-inducing conclusion of Sue Nielsen's story in the post-apocalypse and learn the absolute mind-melting horrors that await you if you decide to survive the apocalypse by eating 14 cabbages per day. You are not prepared for what is about to happen. Stay tuned for part 2 and hit that subscribe button so you don't miss it. It's going to be wild. Oh, and before I forget, thank you to those of you who submitted code for my coding challenge from last video. I got a ton of submissions. I know I said I'd be going over it in the next video, which is this one, but as you can see, this video is a freaking beast, and I don't really think it would fit here. It won't fit in my next one either, but it will fit in the next one after that. The good news is that gives you more time to submit stuff. The bad news is that you will have to wait for me to go over it. Sorry, I just want to give it the time it deserves. Oh, my God. I'm not as tired as I thought I would be after recording that, but I'm not looking forward to editing this audio down. It's so long. Thank you guys for watching. I had a lot of fun making this video. I've been working on it since frickin' like April, March, maybe March, like a while, and took a big time off because of reasons I'll talk about in the next video. But yeah, this one has been in the books for like ages. So I'm very excited to get it done. Also, huge shout out to Tanya. We're splitting the editing on this one, but she's like a champ. Her sections are still like pretty lengthy. So yeah, Tanya's awesome. She's my editor, and I can only have an editor because of my amazing patrons at patreon.com. They are awesome. We've been having so much fun playing on the Project Zomboid server that I set up. We've been doing that every week, except for a couple times I missed because I was editing this. But it's been a hoot. And so if you would like to be a patron, you can go on over to patreon.com/shoddycast or patreon.com/thescienceyt. Both of those work. Both of those contribute to both Shoddycast videos and the science videos. It's great. I wish I could merge them into one Patreon, but I can't. And so we have to. I have to give a special shout out to these amazing patrons who have been supporting me for ages. They're just the top tier people. Talking about M. Lopez, Daisy B, Dr. Vem, Marissa Resnick, and Loretta Mazurf. You guys are awesome. I'm gonna get to editing this. It's gonna be 40. It's absolutely gonna be 40 minutes long. Oh my god, kill me. Oh man, this is gonna be something wild. Bye.